right, so let me give you some examples now. So let's just take the global economy in its professional zone. One of the issues that happens is that phase one, Americans entering the global economy. I'm just using Americans not to, I am Dutch myself, so it's not that America is the only thing I know, but it's like, it's the familiar zone, perhaps. I'm just trying to communicate in shorthand. So you have the American mode of going global, which especially after World War II, etc., which is sort of the Texas cowboy. Yeah, I know best. Well, that didn't work very well in many countries of the world, right? You either had the big guns in terms of money or whatever, and so fine. But if you didn't have that, if you were trying to enter new zones of the global economy, it didn't work very well. So something begins to happen there that three types of people are heavily recruited to enter this frontier space, where a firm is not just doing its usual thing, but wants to enter a market in a foreign country, foreign culture. And at a time, mind you, this starts 20 years ago, 25 years ago, where not everybody was so open to the whole notion of the global economy. And so who were these three? From the American firm hiring within America, middle-class black man, Asian men of no matter what class, and women. And these were seen as subjects that were not threatening and that could hence sort of negotiate. Now, this is an international space, and I found this out, by precisely asking, not the question, are women in there, but asking the question, how does an American business manage to enter this emerging global economy, if you want? That was sort of a thing where let me just illustrate. An anthropologist did a study on Wall Street. When Wall Street begins to change and is trying to get anybody who has money to give them their money. It's not just, okay, you come to me, I'm sitting here waiting for you, etc. No, it's an aggressive. And so you see that in Wall Street, and maybe some of you are here, a whole series of positions are filled by women. And it's a certain kind of position. It's the position of a person who deals with wealthy people who are not barracuda traders, who are just, it could be a widow, it could be a man or woman, it could be, etc. And so there is a whole sort of frontier space that emerges where you have to really invent ways, and that is where women in high finance became critical actors. I think that is extremely important. Now, I want to stay just a bit more with this high sector. For many of the, and now we move to a broader stream of women, traders, whatever high-level professional women. When you look at the top end of our economy, those households have to work like clockwork. And I always say, it's a household, basically, it can be two women, it can be two men, it can be man and woman, whatever. But it's basically, the way I describe it, is the household without a wife. Wife in quotation marks. It doesn't matter that the woman is not wife, you know what I mean? So it's sort of a slightly ironic way of describing it. And so then I look at the cleaning people, the nannies, the nurses, if there is an elderly person. And I say, okay, you cannot just look at the tasks they're doing. You have to understand the space where they're doing it. So let's just look at cleaning woman or, whatever, housekeeper plus cleaning woman. So it's a variable. The task, the job, the actual work might be the same. Cleaning the toilets, making the baths, cleaning the toilets. That stayed with me as an obsession, I guess. So I always check toilets now when I go to a place. Hey, how are the toilets? They're very good here, by the way. Anyhow, so it is a variable. In very modest households, you also have a cleaner, etc. They do the same job in the high end, this high-level professional, the strategic household, as I like to call it. And I say, we need to reconceptualize these workers. They are actually maintenance workers. They are maintaining part of a strategic infrastructure, which may include Wall Street, the corporate center, if we're just talking about New York, plus these houses of high-level professionals. And so this is one way of beginning to recode, you know. You don't just look at what they are. You don't just look at the characteristics of the subject, the languages, the educational levels, the tasks that they do in this case. You actually look at also the larger space within which they're doing it. So then you begin to recover. And you know, for the first time in New York City now, we have a union for domestic workers, organized by immigrant women. And there are these beautiful little little thingies in there. So they understood strategic thinking. I love this. They understood that let's not try to, say, organize in one of the suburbs. That's not going to work very well. They understood there is a particular space in Manhattan, which is the high-rise buildings of apartments of well-to-do areas. Let's hit that zone first, and that was really good. For that, they had a little, what they thought was an obstacle. The men, the supers, they're all men, and a lot of them are Latinos. I grew up in Argentina, so I speak in Spanish with them, etc. Many of them are Latinos. And the women, there was quite a bit of discussing, well, how do we handle this, etc. And then one story that one woman said she went to negotiate, because they had to have access to the households, you understand, the apartments, to begin to talk with the cleaning staff at one point or another, or in the elevators or wherever it might be. It would probably not be in the house, but you know, they needed access to the building. And so she said she went to one of these supers and she said, look, we need your help. We need to be able to reach these women. And the super says, what have you been waiting for? You know, which was very reassuring to the... So this is an extraordinary accomplishment. Now, I think analytically now, both the activist in me, but also the analyst in me, the reason this worked is because it is a strategic infrastructure. It's not simply a home. It is part of a strategic infrastructure. When we begin to recode stuff this way, I'm looking at my clock here. Now, I want to move on, and I want to do the same kind of repositioning of the bits and pieces with something that we think of as probably one of the most exploitative zones, the most vulnerability, where death and injury and, you know, it's everything up, which is the whole question of trafficking. Now, trafficking, as you know, is really a variable. In some cases, the women themselves organize. Like the best-known cases are probably from Eastern Europe and Russia. Russia, the famous cases of women who had actually doctorates, so very, you know, who organized their own. They needed a driver, they dressed themselves up, fancy car, fancy driver, and they drove into Germany. Very often it was that, or Austria, or whatever. So, you know, at this end, in the middle, it's a lot of little, I call them little entrepreneurs, frankly. It often is the neighbor. So it's not necessarily criminal. Huh? The term trafficking needs to be understood. At this end, it is truly murderous criminal syndicates who are making multi-billion, you know, profits every year. The figures are always incomplete. Now, the typical vision is of these women as being, and they are, of course, exploited and sort of beaten into submission. And I think there is a lot to that, though, as I said, it is a variable. Now, as I talk, I'm also going to pass these slides, not very slowly, huh? But they will stay here. So you can always, if tonight you don't have anything better to do, you can visit the... There are 80 slides, so, you know, it could take you 2 hours. Hey, if you don't have anything better to do, why not? So here, you know, these circuits, by now you've read it, you know, this notion of these, you know, these are the making of geographies. Now, these women often go as victims, but they're making geographies that they can revisit, and we have seen, again, the trajectory. They may start as victims, but we know, for instance, of Caribbean women who then become traders, small traders, traders of goods, of peddlers. There are these global peddling circuits. They literally are small. You know, you set up your little table, peddlers. And we now have a great ethnography of these global. So women who often start as trafficked women become also actors in constituting these global circuits, and eventually they jump tracks. But there is a kind of, so a lot of women that start out as extremely vulnerable and super exploited often do become makers of new sort of economies. Now, mostly I think it's a tragic story, okay? I'm not trying to embellish. I'm trying to recover, however, that there is a making, that these women, as they get trafficked, they are also constituting, as are the traffickers, these global circuits. So I don't want to make too much out of this, but anyhow, the issue in the data that I have looked at, there is a kind of feminizing of survival in poor areas and countries poor. It's very difficult nowadays to talk about poor countries because Chad, which used to be like at the bottom, now has discovered vast oil and all the rare earth business. You know what I'm talking about, right? These, the rare earth what we use for for electronics and green batteries, etc. But the truth of the matter is that because of IMF restructuring, I have written a lot about this, I cannot really dwell on it, and World Bank plans, a lot of these governments are just prisoners of their debt, a debt that they often did not ask for. So this feminizing of survival, it means that migrant women and trafficked women are actually, they are super exploited, they are totally underpaid, if paid at all, and yet they are contributing to the survival, I think, of a kind of entrepreneurship, especially in the middle zone, and they are also through remittances contributing to government revenue. I make a big deal out of this in one very long, boring article that I wrote, where I try to understand this notion that instead of seeing them as, I'll just keep on moving these slides here, instead of seeing them as just being at the bottom of the pile, I see them as at the bottom of a pyramid that is a kind of money-making operation. And the question analytically is, how? What are the mechanisms that make it possible for, say, the sex criminal industry, off the backs of low-valued women who make almost no money in this process typically, to actually, through a whole series of mechanisms, produce a global many multi-billion industry. That is what I want to recover. If you take those women away, puff, there's nothing. So I want to recover that. It's an ironic use of the notion of capability, clearly, right? There is a capability there. And there is a system, if you want, that makes it possible off the backs of very poor women to produce these kinds of profits. What I talked about before, the cleaning woman doing the same cleaning as it might be in a modest household, in this strategic household, is actually a strategic worker, right? So how do we, by looking at the larger setting, if the woman herself and her work is the X, I'm interested in the non-X around it in order to understand something. Now, I have to move through this. Again, you can read it later. It's a lot of stuff. So I want to begin to conclude. I have to conclude. I would love to keep on talking, but I can't. This question of what is development. And I recently was at a meeting of UNESCO. UNESCO now has one of the sub-directors who is in charge of sciences, etc., and social sciences, who is just a brilliant woman. She's from Spain. And so this was a very interesting conference in terms of rethinking the question of development. And this is the article, So one way of starting to ask is, what norms are actually wired into this concept, development, which sounds so good? I mean, how can you say no to development? Well, you can, actually, because there are really norms embedded in that which are rather problematic. Now,